Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm Floyd Smith with Unravel Data, and this is cost-effective, high-performance move to cloud. I'm just going to pause here for an additional few seconds to make sure everyone can come in, or that you can get your coffee in front of you or otherwise, and then we'll move forward. So 20 seconds. Okay, here we go. I'm going to let my friend and colleague Chris introduce himself.
Hey folks, Chris Santiago here, the Global Director of Solution Engineering for Unravel Data. Been with the company for a couple of years now. Looking forward to our conversation on how you can best do your cloud migrations.
Yes, and I'm Floyd Smith, Director of Product Marketing. Recently joined Unravel Data and thrilled to be working with this team in Palo Alto. Is our home base, but we are global, as so many companies are these days. And email me with any questions or comments after the presentation. My email address and Chris's will be at the end as well. So a bit about Unravel. We have an experienced team from a wide variety of relevant organizations. And Unravel actually started at Duke University, and you might get to hear that origin story at some point. Our market adoption is very strong. We're doing very well with reaching the Fortune 500. Some startups start with small customers and grow to big ones. We've gotten large customers right from the start and getting a lot of adoption within those customers. And for technology coverage, there's two stories here. The first is that we cover a wide range of technologies. We are starting with what had previously been referred to as big data. That term is still used, and then moving into streaming data and machine learning and AI processing. Also, out of the companies listed here whose technologies we cover, we have several partners. So we're partners with the Microsoft Azure team. We're partners with AWS. We're in the marketplace for both of those and also for Google Cloud Platform. And we're working with HPE, Hewlett Packard Enterprise. So you'll actually, working with those vendors, they will actually mention us very often to people who are moving into their cloud. But some of what we'll be talking about today is about giving you a choice. Gartner recommends that you take a data-driven approach for planning and migrating, and says that that is critical to success. And that's what we'll be talking about today in a couple of different ways to get there. And the really big picture, you can always zoom out as well as zoom in on any process. IBM takes a look at it from the really big picture. So they mention things like governance and cloud design and organizational impact, your management framework. So you should check in on things like that and make sure that they're all as you need them to be. But we're actually working at a more zoomed in level. So we're actually going to show the 10 steps that you need to leave your data center for the cloud. This is the level where you would have a meeting of the project team and say, which step are we on? What are we doing? Because everyone doing work is very aware of the specifics of what they're doing. So this list of 10 steps is the 10 steps that you can share in those meetings and say, where are we? And then how long is each of these going to take? Who's going to need to be involved? Because you're going to need different team members for each of these steps as part of your overall project team. Okay, so why on-prem and why cloud? So let's compare the positives and negatives of the on-prem experience to the cloud. And mostly the negatives are the flip side of the positives. So on-premises. On-premises is not getting a lot of love these days, but it's still very popular. There's still huge investment in on-premises. It's still larger than cloud, industry analysts say, although that may change in the years ahead. So on-premises, what you need is already there. but it's hard to start projects because you have to get approval. In the cloud, it's very easy to start projects. It's also very easy for them to get large before you had really planned it. On-premises, you often have skilled staff in place. For the cloud, it's usually new to people, but it's quite attractive. On-premises, you have central management. In the cloud, you have less management burden. You know, DevOps, that kind of started up because developers started doing things in the cloud. They needed to do their own operations, but they didn't have experienced people. DevOps is now a profession and an approach. But security, on-premises, there's usually a comfort level with security, and often contracts will specify that something be on-premises. Is that always really justified? That depends on your setup. Cloud has world-class security, but often people feel that the cloud is less secure, or they have specific problems to look out for. In terms of cost, on-premises has lower operational costs, so you pay up front, and then you run pretty cheap. Talking about space payments, electricity, things like that. In the cloud, you're charged by the second for everything that you do, but there's no upfront capital cost. So it's very, very appealing that way. Sometimes though, you get big bills, and that's something we're going to be talking about. So on premises, there's kind of an inherent cost control because you have to go through a budgeting process to do anything new and big, or justify moving someone else off. The cloud is inherently scalable, both in terms of usage, and your costs can scale on you. And we'll talk about how to make that work for you and not against you. On-premises always at least starts out with one location to manage. And the cloud is very easily globally distributed. And a reality that a lot of us who are more technical face is just that the cloud is hot and on-premises is not at the moment. It can be a little hard to justify not moving something to cloud. The process that we'll be describing today will help you make those decisions, though, in a smart and widely agreed way. Okay, so move to cloud is one of the grand challenges for IT. I don't know if many of you are familiar with the sciences, but often something that takes years or decades to work through is called a grand challenge in a field. And move to cloud is definitely a grand challenge for IT. This is an old map that shows dragons in the seas. Ships would disappear for no reason, and of course they attributed it to all sorts of mythical creatures. And so we'll face some mythical creatures in our move to cloud, and hopefully defeat or avoid them and get to our destination. So one issue is that the promised ROI is not realized by the business. Okay. So the first thing is costs. And cost is the issue that we're mostly going to focus on because that's what can really cause nasty surprises. There are hidden costs out there. Pay-as-you-go sounds great, and it is when you start out small and you're doing development, but there's no cap in your costs. And so this can encourage bad, in other words, expensive cloud usage behavior among end users, even experts. Someone on our management team was present when a team ran up a six-figure bill in a weekend testing some new things out. They weren't even doing work, and they managed to hit $100,000. And then performance, it's a shared infrastructure environment. So you hear things like the noisy neighbor problem, which you can avoid for extra money and extra planning. And you have to be careful because your previous architecture can be more performant than the new one. And that's, of course, somewhat a matter of perception. You can speed up the average speed of a process even by, say, a factor of 2 in the cloud. But if some queries are slower than they used to be, and if that query is between a user clicking on a button and the screen refreshing, and suddenly that's slow, you may have sped up almost everything, but your user will say this is slower than it used to be. So that's the kind of thing that you have to look at. User experience is part of it. Okay, so identifying on-prem workloads to move to cloud. You need to create a set of steps, and this is like a model set of steps for you to do that. Sorry, I've moved ahead. Okay, so this is a set of steps that I've given you as a starting point. And so you're going to list all your workloads from all your sources: third-party software, open source software, software you've created in-house, and you may already have software running in the cloud. So take a look at all of that and make a list. And you're going to check it twice as well, right? To get all Christmassy about it. And you're going to end up stack ranking the workloads by priority. And there are a lot of criteria for what those priorities can be. And you might have different stakeholders wanting to move fast or not wanting to mess with what they've already got. They're worried about something not working. So going through this process carefully is going to help you. And then this is the famous chicken and egg problem. So I'll go through the cartoon first and then show how it relates to what we're talking about. So the old question is, which came first, the chicken or the egg? And scientists finally answered it some years ago. The first creatures, the precursors of chickens, were actually dinosaurs. And dinosaurs had eggs. So there were eggs before there were chickens. And this shows a dinosaur kind of slinking off. And if you think of like a T-Rex coming out of an egg. So for our purposes, the chicken and egg question is, which workloads to move and which cloud platform and which technologies are you going to use? So do you look at all your workloads and completely characterize them and so on? That can take a lot of time and a lot of work. And then decide which cloud platform? Or do you make the cloud platform basis without really relation to the workloads you're going to move, but then end up with some misfits? So that's a dynamic that you'll encounter. A couple of ways to solve that. The first is to gain experience. And there's an old saying that experience is what you get when you don't get what you want. So that's something that's the hard way to get there. And we all get there eventually on different things that we do professionally. Another way is to hire in help, consultants and so on. The consultants will have started by having some of the same problems you do. They'll have done a bunch of work, and then they'll be at this point of being experienced, and you're hiring them in. But they'll tend to apply their past experience to your problem. It might not necessarily fit, and you're somewhat at the mercy of the consultants then, because you don't have experience and they do. So you just have to take their word for it. With a tool like Unravel, you can come in and much more easily characterize all your workloads, see how they look in the cloud, and then look at the cloud platform and the underlying services that you want to use, and you'll be seeing a demo of that. So various approaches to this. You need to baseline your performance and resource use. So you need to characterize your on-premises so you can nearly reproduce it. And you're going to identify CPU and memory usage. You're going to identify the supporting elements in the software stack. Identifying dependencies such as data tables use. Just finding out who the users are of a data table can be a big deal. Then for each cloud platform, you identify the software targets that you may consider using. You specify the adaptation work needed for the cloud software version. So versions gets to be a really big deal in this kind of a move. You usually aren't on the latest version of every piece of software that you're running. The cloud is not either, and so you have to mix and match from where you are to where you're going to be. And sometimes that can be quite a bit of work. So then you look at the different cloud software tools that you have access to and see which ones need what adaptation work. And again, this is just characterizing. You're not doing the work yet. So then you can optimize your workloads. And that means, do you optimize first or lift and shift? Now, it always sounds great to take opportunities to optimize. But in real life, people get in a hurry. They have a project. They're going to move to cloud in 6 months. If it takes 10 months to do the optimization, well, it's not going to happen. So people largely lift and shift. But you can create a decision process of your own. You know that set of steps I showed you a little bit ago for deciding on how to get through the process? Well, you can do something similar for making the decision as to how to optimize workloads. So instead of just starting a meeting and having an argument break out, you can actually have a process for people to go through that you've agreed in advance. and use that to decide which workloads get optimized or which just get moved as is. Also, that's the experience of not getting what you want. Once or twice you'll move something without optimizing it. It'll be very expensive, and then next time you'll consider the decision more carefully. Oh yes, and if you have questions as we're going along, please enter them in the chat box. Then you have the fun job of matching services to cloud equivalents. Now, I've deliberately showing the scary version of this, and then I'll describe how to attack this problem. So you basically need to capture data, store it, transform it, publish it, and it gets consumed. And each different platform, each different platform has its own tools for that. Let me catch up to my slide. That was a cheap thrill. Okay, there you go. Each different cloud platform has different tools for this. There are also open source software. There's also open source software that works across the platform, and third-party software. And the third-party software may work on some platforms and not others. For instance, Databricks started, I believe, in Azure and then expanded to AWS, or vice versa, and has recently added support for Google Cloud Platform. Okay, then you need to estimate your cost and performance in the cloud. And per workload, you should estimate your instance sizes, your CPU costs, your memory costs, your storage costs, your networking costs, your software licensing costs, and other costs. So it's a lot to do, and it's the kind of thing that gets done kind of by rote or through experience and habit on premises. You don't yet have muscle memory of how to do these things in the cloud. So you have to break them down and analyze them carefully. And of course, that can be quite a bit of work. And then you need to estimate the cost and schedule for the move. And this sounds somewhat simple, but there's a little bit of a gotcha there. So it sounds simple. You have to estimate the people time, how long is it going to take on the calendar, how much are you going to tie up and need management, because they're not always there when you need them. And, they're doing something else, right? So you got to get their time scheduled in advance. And then finally, there are the direct and indirect costs of doing the move itself. But the reason I mentioned GIGO, or garbage in, garbage out, if you don't have a good handle on things from the earlier steps, then it's actually very difficult to do this well. And scarce resources can suddenly not be available when you finally get around to needing them, because something took longer because you hadn't broken it down carefully. And then you need to track and ensure the success of the migration. Now, this is the last step we're going to go through carefully, but you actually have to track what you're doing. What are the workloads that you're working on, and how's the process going? So what are the workloads you've moved? What are the ones you're moving? What are the ones you're not going to move? The on-premises estate actually has less to do as you move workloads away from it. So how do you downsize that, or do you? Do you move new workloads into it and then move those to the cloud? And then what's the impact on the cloud estate? How is that getting managed? It goes from a few people doing development projects to suddenly massive projects with big bills. Have you saved money? Are you still getting the performance? And then the last three steps are summed up in a single slide because they can be handled as a separate topic. In the cloud, you've got to optimize each workload. You might have already optimized it on premises to rationalize it, but you need to look at making sure it runs most efficiently in the cloud. Let me talk briefly about the topic of auto-scaling. So auto-scaling is great because the resources are always there when you need them in the cloud. That overcomes a major, major problem on premises, of course. The Christmas rush and you don't have enough servers and people are getting not able to use your site, right, in your busy season as an example. On cloud, that's an easy problem to solve. But then you have to scale down again when the peak passes. But you don't want to overdo that. So that's a big issue, is taking advantage of scaling up and scaling down, reducing your costs without introducing risk. You need to manage the workload in the cloud, and so you'll learn the idiosyncrasies of the cloud platform and the services that you've taken on. And once you have all those in shape, then you're going to grab some more on-premises workloads and go through all of it again. So for all of this, you have the choice of going automatic or going manual. And some of you, I do, have experience driving a stick shift. Some of you might do so at the moment. But over the years, it's gone from cars being all stick shift to being largely stick shift to being some stick shift, like for a while cheaper cars were stick shift, to where now almost every car that isn't a performance car is an automatic. And it's just easier, cheaper, and it's actually less maintenance now with the automatic. The automatic used to be a major source of maintenance headaches, but now it stops you from putting too much wear and tear in your car by shifting badly. So what we've talked about is largely having you guys get into your head what a manual process for all of this would be like in your own company, in your own environment. And then there's an automatic approach using a tool like Unravel, which leads us to our demo. And now Chris Santiago is going to walk us through how some of these steps look using Unravel software.
Perfect. Thanks, Floyd. Thanks for all this good information. It's all very good stuff. Let me go ahead and share my window here shortly. And Floyd, if you can just confirm if you can see my screen, okay?
Yes, looks great.
All right. So, hey, folks, so Floyd did an excellent job walking you through steps that we've seen, multiple customers through our engagements throughout their migration journey. I think these are tried and tested steps that, we see, really drives customers to success when they're going through their migration journey. I'm going to flip the script here a little bit here. And so I want to give you another alternative approach following the same guidelines that Floyd had just walked you through, but with augmenting those 10 steps with a tool to help you really make the decisions on what you want on your migration journey based on actual data points. And so what this is going to allow you as you are going through your cloud migration journey is, really de-risking, the whole process and ensuring that you're making the right decisions throughout the steps, all the steps of your cloud journey. And, everything that Floyd had talked about so far has been, it's been, a lot of the stuff is, manual, right? When you're trying to understand and baseline the performance of your jobs, you're probably doing this from a manual standpoint, understanding the workloads, before the move and trying to potentially optimize before, that's a manual process. Even if we get into the application side of the house and trying to understand the different line of businesses and, the type of jobs that they're running and what are the interdependencies on what tables that they're using, is there a workflow tool that's out there that's orchestrating everything and how does that all tie together? And if I wanted to bring in this data pipeline, did I make sure that I've accounted for everything? Because hey, if you don't and you miss that, that's going to be a costly miss, right? Both from a migration standpoint and then also just from, satisfaction of your end users once they're actually in the cloud. And so I'm going to walk you through those high level, those same 10 steps again, but using an approach, using a tool like Unravel to help really help guide you throughout your journey here. And so when Floyd started off his talk, it's really trying to identify the workloads and really try to baseline where things are at today, even before we move into whatever that future architecture may be in the cloud. And so what you're seeing on the screen right now is a couple of reports here. I'm going to show you. I'm going to walk you through a couple of them here. And so in this first report here, think of this as this is just a discovery. How is everything going on with my cluster? How is it used today? You may be using tools like, for example, like Cloudera Manager or like Embari, or maybe you have some Grafana dashboards out there you've created yourself. All good stuff and, all good information, but, we'll drill here a little bit deeper. But in the report that we have here out of the box, as soon as you've configured Unravel, is on the left-hand side here, we can just get the high-level understanding of the services that are running on here. So we can get that information. We can understand from a hardware perspective, hey, how many nodes And what are the roles of these nodes, and what are the sizes in terms of vCore, in terms of memory, in terms of disk? You get all that high level information here. Disk usage, this obviously becomes very important once you start thinking about moving some of this data into the cloud. And so having a good baseline knowledge of where disk is actually being used is very helpful. Admittedly, a lot of the stuff you're probably getting out of from your tools today, where you're going to see Unravel seeing a lot additional value is giving you things in terms of applications and users and line of businesses. So think of it as like if this was a like a BI cube, now we're giving you additional dimensions that you can go ahead and start slicing and dicing your workloads, right? And so if I want to understand overall the type of workloads that are being run on the cluster itself, I can get this information here. So in my test environment here, I've got I've got a lot of batch workloads here, and so I can see that from here. If I want to look at this by user, so a lot of customers have service accounts, and that service account is tied to a product line, and they want to understand how much consumption is that over this the multi-tenant environment. We can start getting some high-level metrics from this standpoint. From a queue perspective, so for folks that heavily use queues on the on-prem world, we can start getting a little bit more information from that standpoint. On the right-hand side here, overall, think of this as like overall cluster usage in terms of CPU, in terms of memory. I love showing this report to customers because, depending on who you talk to, some customers that all they do is they run their jobs, during business hours, they think that the cluster is just jam-packed, 24/7, right? But once you start zooming out and you start looking at this, like overall, are you actually, maxing out the resources on your cluster? And so this average usage here becomes very helpful for understanding, hey, are we at close to capacity, or maybe it's 50%. Maybe once we actually move to the cloud, maybe we can we can do this with less resources. And so we start getting that information from here. The heat map here on the bottom is just more visualization of, the peak times of the cluster. So, is this hot running 24/7? I could see that information here. Is this bursty? Maybe just 9 to 5 is where most of your workloads are. Now you can start opening up the conversations of maybe working with technology that's more auto-scaling in nature, right? So again, you're just getting a baseline of how people are just using the cluster. The next screen here is where we go ahead and we drill in. Oh, let me go ahead and log in here real quick here. Onto the applications. So we had talked about how Unravel has good insight on the application side, but if we wanted to get, oops, sorry, that's how you guys know this is live. If we want to get more information on just, hey, how are like my applications? Like, are they, are there certain applications that are taking, most of the resources? Are there ones that are just very, high in disk IO? Which ones are taking up the most cluster overall, CPU, memory? Right now we're looking at Hive. If I want to be able to look at this from a Spark perspective, it really starts giving you more information on just how people are just using the cluster. Again, it's just giving you an idea of like overall cluster usage, but taking it a step further, where a lot of these tools like your Clutter and Manager and your Embaris are going to give you things like overall platform specific. It's not going to really drill it down into the application, to the user, to the line of business. And these reports are really geared to give you those level of insights. And so, we start getting even more baseline of performance and, which ones are the most performant and least performant of my applications on my on-prem side. From the data side, we can, my screens here had timed out, so I apologize for logging in every time. But on the data side, again, equally important. This is a lot of times this may be your first phase one of I need to get this data into maybe Azure ADLS or maybe into my S3 buckets from within from AWS. I want to understand how the tables are actually being used. We've got metrics from that standpoint. We can even take it a step further. Not only just show you the tables, but even give you hot, warm, and cold analysis. So if we're looking to maybe bring in some of the cold data that hasn't been used in some time, but maybe we can bring this into like a cold tier storage, starts opening up those possibilities. We could even look at the applications that are tied to this particular table. So if I'm going to be moving, maybe my next migration move might be looking at this, per table. And so if I move this one big table, what are the applications that are submitted to it? Who are the users that are actually using it? This becomes very, very helpful for really just understanding the intricacies of, the type of workloads that you'd be moving into the cloud. Because ultimately what you want to avoid is I move this table and I don't bring in the appropriate applications. Well, that's a miss on the migration path that could just totally change your whole migration project plan. And this could potentially have major cost implications down the road, right? So having the understanding of all the intricacies of how everything relates together, and really gives you good insights onto how people are using the cluster today. So now let's actually switch gears here. Now let's actually talk about, now that we've got a good baseline of how performance is today, the engines that are actually being used. Now let's talk about planning for the future architecture. So we have reports here that would help you out from that standpoint. So one of the first things that customers will do, working with some of our RSI partners, is I want to look at this maybe from, I might want to move my workloads to EMR or HD Insight or Dataproc or whatever it may be. But a lot of times there could be some version mismatches based on the version, on-prem version that they have today versus the future stack that they want to go to. And so being right out the gate, understanding green are the ones that we're going to have no problems with. The orange ones here are the ones that are not compatible. So we may want to think about workarounds for that, right? This saves a lot of time for folks, because if they know that I'm an H-based heavy shop, maybe HD Insight, at least the core HD Insight cluster, may not be the best for my H-based use cases. So this is a very easy report for us to understand if there's going to be some version mismatches. Once we start thinking, okay, Floyd had mentioned, lift and shift is a very popular model, right? Maybe I just want to get everything into the cloud and then I'm going to modernize my architecture. I think that's a very popular approach. And so we've got reports where we can actually give you some good, projected total cost of ownership once you're actually into the cloud. And so with our reports, we play nicely with all the cloud providers, whether they be Google, Amazon, Azure. And so you can go ahead, you can pick your service. You can go ahead and you can pick your region. If you want to select specific VMs or EC2 instances, if it's AWS, and if you even have custom costs, maybe you have special agreements with the cloud vendors, you can go ahead and put that information here. Once you run that report, now we can start thinking, if we were to do this in a true lift and shift fashion. And what I mean by that is matching like for like what you have from a hardware perspective, you can start getting some high level costs of what this may be, right? So if you're putting this into your projections and you're trying to understand what the budget may be, this is this is a good place to start. One of the benefits that Unravel brings to the table is not only do we know the hardware, but we know the actual data usage, right? So there could be times where applications might be using, could use like 50% of the resources, or, you're only at 50% of the cluster, right? So we do have some algorithms based in place where we have another model here where it's cost reduction, where we're going to actually say, hey, take that same lift and shift model, but let's actually base this on actual usage. So, I might have spent, top tier hardware for my on-prem environment, but maybe I'm not using it as much as I should. And so driving, your data points based on data here, we can actually say, if you're doing this based on actual usage, we could actually bring this down from, I glossed it over, $453 down to $167. And this is per hour. Now, mind you, this is projected, but like do the math. And if this was a true environment that you're going to, we're actually talking savings of $1 million just from this report alone. And so now you can start seeing the power of really driving your decisions based on actual data points, and us, connecting into the different various cloud providers, really gives you a good sense of what that total cost of ownership may be once you move into the cloud. One more scenario I'll talk about here in terms of migration itself is we do have a workload fit report. And really the difference on this one is for folks that want to just start off right off the bat and modernize their data architecture. Maybe they want to have ephemeral EMR clusters that are spun up purpose-built for a specific job. Or maybe they do want to still have some multi-tenancy for some of their line of businesses, but they want to have maybe like 10 clusters, always running clusters with auto scaling, as opposed to just having one monolithic multi-cluster that they might be moving off of today. Sky's the limit when you're in the cloud, right? And so when in those type of scenarios, you're going to want to just start slicing and dicing, the type of workloads, right? And so whether this be, I'm going to look at just my Spark workloads, or maybe I want to do this by my service accounts, or maybe I have tags set up. And so we have the ability to set things up by department, by priority, by team, whatever you have this situated at. You go ahead and you select your example here. In my example here, I'm going to say Spark. And here we can see that, again, that very familiar heat map view. Again, tied to the selections that you've had here, but it starts giving you some good information on how clusters, the resources are actually being used. So we could see this from a job count perspective. We can see it from a memory perspective, vCore perspective. And at least in this particular example, we could see that, it is semi-bursty. Certain days, certain times of the day is where there's a little bit more peak, and then it kind of goes down. It's not a consistent color here. So that's just, visualizations that we can see. Where things get interesting is here at the bottom. And so I ran this report earlier just in the purposes of time. But here in this particular example, I picked HD Insights, the West US region. I had specific VMs that I wanted to select. And now, based on that specific slice, that specific workload, we can now start getting that TCO, that projected total cost of ownership for example, 100% SLAs. So think of this as, I don't want any degradation in performance. Yeah, performance is top of mind. I'll pay top dollar. Here's your projected cost per hour. And then here's some recommendations in terms of, what those instances may be. Just on the very extreme here, on the 80% side, this would be like, think of this would be like your staging environments, or environments where, if 20% of the applications are run a little bit slower, I'm okay with it, but cost is my most important driver. We can start providing those options as well. For folks that may be coming into like an auto scaling type of scenario, we also provide projections on not only giving you a recommendation on what that auto scaling schedule may be, but then what are those projected costs if you were to save this auto scaling? Again, based on actual data usage, based on the subset of the window that we've sampled. If we were to go to a scaling model of this, we could save close to 19%. And then you can see the cost of hour here that we were able to drop from $212 to $172. So armed with all this information, I think, you can confidently make the right decisions on what that future architecture may be. You can confidently feel good about, how much that's actually going to cost you once you actually move to the cloud. And, ultimately you're de-risking your whole migration project, right? If there's a lot betting for customers to make sure that they're betting, they're picking the right technology. The worst case scenario is, you move to the cloud and then either you get sticker shock or it's just taking way too long. And we've seen that with many customers. And then it ends up being a failed project. And then they just continue just going status quo with their legacy apps, right? And that's what we want to avoid here. And best way to do this, I think it's even, outside of Unravel, anything that you can do where you're driving your decisions based on data is really what's going to make you be successful ultimately. Last but not least, we've been talking about the migration aspect, but the later points in Floyd's discussion was really once you're actually in the cloud, how can you make sure that you're getting the most performance from within the new data architecture? Because the last thing that you're going to want is you got your users that come in and it's slower for them, or they're not, there's challenges and issues that they're seeing from within their in their application, yada yada yada, right? And so we do have one extra layer once you're actually in your final state to make sure that your applications are performant. And so here's a sneak peek of something like a typical Spark application that's submitted. So you can look at other past webinars to see some of the things and features that we have in terms of an application performance management aspect. But really the key point here is enabling your users to understand where the bottlenecks are in this new architecture. Because hey, just because we're in the cloud doesn't mean that everything's going to work, even better. I mean, it's a new environment, new technology, new problems, and so you need something there to help guide you in the right direction. Some other things that we've seen with other customers is that in this new world, the expertise of knowing exactly where to look is even less because, hey, this is new stuff, right? These stacks haven't been around for decades like some of the other legacy systems that they're migrating off of. So if there's anything that we can do to really quickly show them where the challenges are, and then also give them proactive recommendations and insights on what you can do to actually, make this application more performant, is really going to ensure that your end users are happy and getting the performance. Hopefully they're getting even faster performance and even, better results than what they were getting in the older system. But then at the same time, you saving costs in terms of not over allocating resources, that whole conversation. But, just to kind of summarize from an Unravel perspective, we have a tool that will guide you through every step of the way from the beginning parts of just discovery, understanding what that implementation plan will look like, giving you a data set of making sure that you've got a very concrete plan of which applications to migrate and when and which technology to use to de-risk that migration factor. And then once you're actually in the cloud, really ensuring that we're giving you guys tip-top performance in this future architecture so that your end users and the organization are happy with their decision. With that, Floyd, back to you.
Okay, great. Thanks a million, Chris. Some of the things that Chris mentioned, and I'm going to start sharing my screen here in just a second. Let's see, let's present that, and I will share that screen. And some of the things that Chris was talking about, there we go. Some of the things that Chris was talking about, they're cool from a technical point of view, but the nice thing is that they're also really, really helpful from a management point of view. I looked at the signups for this webinar, and there were people from all different parts of a lot of different companies. And so a tool like what Chris was just sharing with you gives you a common language. Just as a simple example, he showed a heat map of when things are busy. So if you want to run a job, often people in ops will know that a certain part of a certain day is slow, and it's a good time to run jobs like that. But how slow? What are some other times we could try running some of these test or one-off jobs? And so a heat map like that just gives you a quick, easy answer, comprehensive and complete. And so that really gets into one of those issues in that IBM slide from the beginning was governance. And you can have your technical group and your management group able to look at a screen together and make some of these decisions and know what's available. So it's a huge help. So you'll want to succeed in every step of your migration journey. And so we kind of, I'm not going to go through all the details, but we've cut it down into 4 different big steps. You need to assess what you've got, you need to plan the move, you need to do the migration, and then optimize and scale in the cloud. We're only focusing today on cloud migration, but of course, the reason Unravel was set up was to actually manage your stuff in place. So whether that's on-premises or in the cloud, and then we've grown this functionality of supporting move to cloud as well. So then you have one environment that you're using, whether in all 3 phases, when it's running on premises, when you're moving it, and when it's in the cloud. And again, that gives you a common language, and you start to get muscle memory on how and what you can, how to do things and what you can do in Unravel. there's a specific thing I wanted to mention here that you start on the assess stage, and you're getting insights and recommendations. We often don't mention those are powered by AI. So Unravel is kind of an AI portal into your operation. So Unravel Data serves as a force multiplier, and we started out in the big data area, and we're supporting now also more streaming data, and gradually growing, release by release, growing what we support. So on-premises, we get used first usually with Hadoop, Cloudera, Impala, Hive, Spark, and recently adding Kafka. And then our destination, the matching technologies in the cloud and then some. So AWS EMR, Azure HD Insight, Google Dataproc, and Google BigQuery. If you work with one of these cloud providers and start to use these technologies, you'll often get recommendations from the cloud provider to use Unravel to help you with the move to cloud. It's much easier for them to support you if you're using a tool like Unravel. We've added Databricks and Snowflake, and both of those run on multiple public clouds. And we will soon be supporting 3 more AWS technologies, Redshift, Glue, and Athena. And then, of course, we support the move to cloud functionality, which we're discussing here. So again, the 10 steps to leave your data center for the cloud. I'll finish up and leave a little time for questions. And you're going to identify the workloads to move. You're going to baseline their performance and resource use, so you have the before and after. You can optimize the workloads before the move or lift and shift. Do that matching from that blue diagram I showed you with the cloud services that are available on different cloud platforms. You estimate the cost and performance of the software post-move. Estimate the cost and schedule for the move. Track and ensure the success of the migration of the workloads you've chosen for a given tranche of your work. Then in the cloud, you optimize the workloads and manage them, get experience with them, and then you rinse and repeat. You're more knowledgeable as you go through this time after time. And we've provided quite a few resources. So recent blog posts, what is cloud migration? Very simple definition of cloud migration and a brief discussion of its importance. Then the blog post 10 steps to cloud migration largely gives similar steps to our discussion today in a blog post format. So you don't have to hit play if you can forward it to people that you want to talk about this with. Chris did a webinar just recently, a couple of weeks ago, why cloud migrations fail. About a third of cloud migrations fail. So don't let that be you. And Chris's webinar will help you laugh about those stories instead of being one of those stories. AWS provides a video for us on using Unravel to move to Amazon EMR, and Microsoft has a blog post for moving big data workloads to Azure HD Insight. And again, these guys, our cloud partners, have a big stake in our success and your success. And so they're looking to have our tools make your life easier, make it easier for you to move things to cloud. One of the things, I'll hit that in the Q&A in a minute. And then a couple of links. You can try Unravel for free, and you can contact Unravel. And that is the end of the presentation. And we have some time for questions. And I have a couple of questions here if you don't have nothing coming in.
Sure, let's do it.
So yes. So one of the things that comes up is that people are saying, okay, so I've got this for move to cloud, but what do I do before and after? So with Unravel, you actually use the same tool on premises for the move and in the cloud, and that's a big help because then you have familiarity with the tool in all 3 phases of your operation.
That's correct.
Yeah. A question for Chris, in working with customers, is there a particular step that we've discussed today where people tend to get hung up or have surprises or intense discussions rather than arguments?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I would say when, having the customer agree to the, whatever that future architecture, that's a challenge in itself, right? But once you start actually planning for that migration, like what is phase one? What goes in there? Are we trying to go for the big bang? Are we trying to go for, the easy ones? Those are the questions you need to ask. Once you actually start going through the migration process, one of the challenges that adds time to timelines, adds costs to the project overall, is not having a good understanding of everything that needs to be moved to the cloud. And where we're seeing a lot of customers get hung up and sometimes fail is that they have kind of an idea. They come up with a project plan, they put some dates to it, they throw some resources to it, and then the wheel starts going. And once they find out that, oh, I didn't realize that I needed to bring in this source system, or I didn't realize that the complexities of these SQL queries in my data warehouse are not compatible with whatever the future state technology may be. That's where people get hung up, because it was unexpected. You've already started your migration project, and now we're talking about trying to fit that in. You're rushing it through, maybe not getting it all throughout. And then once you actually make it into whatever the final architecture may be, whatever services that you're using, is it even the right fit anymore? And so I would say probably one of the biggest things to keep in mind is really understanding every nuance of how people are using the environment today, and making sure that you account for that when you're actually going through your migration process. And as I had stated earlier, Unravel as a stack optimization tool, first and foremost, we are able to give you everything in terms of the application, even down to the container level. So, if I want to understand, how much resource consumage, resources were consumed down to like the task level, we have that information. So nothing is missed, and the relationships and all of the services that are all intertwined. So, my advice to everyone here on the webinar is, the more you can be data driven on the decisions you need to make into the cloud is the only way to set you up for success for your cloud migration journey.
And I'll just mention one more thing about Unravel. Along with all the depth that Chris just showed, the software actually has a chatbot that you can interact with and ask top-level questions about your environment and get answers. So that's one of the fun things that when we show it running on premises or in the cloud, we show that off. So you'll have people who become very expert in using the software, and then you'll have people who work at it at the chatbot level. So there's all sorts of different ways to dive in here. So we hope that this has been helpful. And please take that 10-step slide, which I repeated at the beginning and end of the presentation, and use that for discussion. Everyone gets into the details of what they're good at, whether it's management, tech, people who walk both ways, and something like that can help orient everyone and let you know where you're at and let you know what's involved. That's not easy, but it's doable. And then if you do use Unravel, there's a lot of different things you can do with it before and after the move to cloud. We want to emphasize that. But it really comes in handy at the move to cloud time, at a time when you can't really do governance because you don't have good enough answers to your questions. It's kind of like, we'll see, and these are expensive and difficult things that involve a lot of people. So having help like that really makes a difference. I'm going to wrap up now and give you guys a few minutes back. I know we're all backed up with Zoom meetings, a lot of us through our day. So let me give you a few minutes back at the end of this one. Thank you for Chris and I, and we'll look forward to interacting with you in future webinars. Bye-bye.
Great. Thanks, folks. Thanks for attending. Bye for now.